Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I welcome you all in a workshop of Assessment and Evaluation in Science Education, Code 6774. So today I am going to introduce the main points regarding assessment and evaluation in science education. The objectives of today's session will be that after this session the students will be able to define assessment, realize need of assessment in curriculum, tell a role of assessment for effective learning, assessment scientific skills, explain types of assessment, describe weaknesses of norm referred assessment, then integrate assessment with instruction, determine data collection tool for assessment purposes, manage classroom assessment, and so many other objectives will be achieved. Keeping in view your previous knowledge regarding assessment, there are many definitions of assessment, but I have written assessment is a process of gathering data, what a student can do and how much a student has attained. Another definition, it is simply about collecting, analyzing, interpreting and decision making about the level of knowledge, skill or behavioral changes of a student. There are many things which our students take granted of, that test is an assessment, but remember test is not assessment. Test, examination, evaluation, measurement, and these are related terms which you must distinguish one thing from the other thing. Now test is an instrument or tool used to get information about knowledge, skills or abilities of students in a particular subject. Test is not an assessment, rather test is a tool, test an instrument with the help of which we get information. Okay? Then this is test by function, definition of test by function. Another definition of test by structure, test is a set of statements, test is a set of statements which are in form of question or construct. There may be two things, there are questions, so when number of questions are formulated or developed, that become a test, and another form is construct. In psychology, in the subject of psychology, when you have to measure the attitude, aptitude or behavior of the students, we formulate constructs and through that construct we get data. So test is a data collection tool. Then testing, test is noun whereas testing is verb. So it is called that testing is a process or method of collecting data. So a process or method which helps to measure level of achievement of students in any class. Test development, administration, scoring, interpretation and making decisions. When one passes through this process is known as testing. Understand? Examination, examination is a series of tests. You know that federal board or any provincial board, when they conduct examination, that does not comprise a single test or single day activity, rather it comprises the activities of conducting many tests and in diversified areas, for example in different subjects. A series of tests used for getting information for the purpose of assessment. So a process of administration of series of tests in different subjects, this is called examination. Next is educational decisions, decisions on part of students and decisions on part of teacher. You know that on part of student, what they have learned, what is their achievement level, and then whether on the basis of those information which have been got through testing process and assessment process, students are promoted or they are decided to retain in the same class. For example, if they have not got the certain standard or particular achievement level, then it is decided that they should be retained in the same class. And on the other hand, decision on part of teacher. A teacher teach in the class, then assess the students. On the basis of students' achievement, teacher decide that what were the weaknesses and drawbacks in my teaching. Teacher decides to bring particular advancements and improvements in teaching methodology, or whether they have to give more stress upon the lesson, or they have to change the mode of communication style, or they have to change the way of teaching. You can say they can teach by any other method. So, these are the decisions which are related for teacher. Why assessment? Why there is a need of assessment? For example, you know that programs are developed, and when programs are developed, a blueprint is prepared, and that blueprint or guidelines document is known as curriculum. For example, if you minus the assessment from the curriculum, what will happen? This is so that there was a course developed to count the number of lions in a jungle. This was the objective of the course, and content was that the person will go in the jungle and they will just count the lions. But there was no component of assessment that how they will count the lions and what will happen. There is no exercise to assess the ability of those people, that when a lion attacks the person, what they will do. So, in first cohort, many lions attacked the people and people were killed. So, this was the consequence of missing assessment component in the curriculum. So, keeping this story, you will realize that assessment is very important component of our curriculum. Even the teaching learning process, because assessment tells us that at what level students have been reached, are all activities going in a right way, or is there any anomaly, deficiency. So, these things can be identified from the information which we get through testing and the process of assessment. Then there are some principles of assessment. These are not complete principles that you have to follow these strictly. There are so many other principles, keeping in view the diversified situation. When situation change, principles also have some changed form. Assessment, most important skills of the students. It means that when a teacher has to develop assessment or go through the process of assessment, it should be aimed at that they should assess the important knowledge of students. Then there should be a clear model of progression, that how you have to proceed to assess the knowledge of the student, to assess the skills of the students, and assess the behaviors of the students. That is affective domain according to Bloom's taxonomy. Dig holes, don't cut grass. Now, what are the meanings of this? Dig holes, don't cut grass, that your assessment process should not be surface, rather it should focus upon the deep understanding of the students, in-depth learning of the students. Be clear what you are not assessing. The teacher must be aware that I was not my meaning of assessment were not this, because you know when question is posed or when you use any assessment style, assessment technique, student give you wrong answers. So teacher should be aware that this is what I am not going to assess. So you have to identify the wrong practices and those things which are not relevant. For it we say another principle, that is principle of validity. Your assessment should be valid, and again your assessment should be reliable. Develop marking scheme while developing test. When you develop a test for getting data, marking scheme should be there. Now what will happen if you develop marking scheme? Marking scheme will help you the rational marking style, and the personal bias will be minimized, because one the marker has to mark the test according to that given scheme. Because remember that when a test is developed, there is a situation, the person who is developing a test is in a certain state of mind, but afterwards state of mind change, and if you have not prepared scheme of marking at that time, many drawbacks come while at the process of marking. And when marking scheme is developed, when marking starts, the state of mind changes, and so the actual results which one wants to get from that particular assessment or particular test may change. Context also changes. That is why it is said that develop marking scheme while developing test. Employ rubric and table of specification. I am not going to give detail of rubric and table of specification, because in forthcoming lecture you will study these terms comprehensively. Assessment should match with teaching and objectives. You know that this is very big principle. If assessment is contradictory to the prescribed objectives or standards, or you can say competencies are some other things, objectives are other, and you are going to assess another area. So there should not be a contradiction among these components. Each and everything should be coherent, and there should be logical sequence among each and every component of the assessment. Assessment should be balanced. What do you mean by balanced? Here balanced mean that assessment should be purposeful, the time of the assessment should be prescribed or informed to the students, and again which you are going to achieve through this assessment should be clear, and the content which you are going to assess have been given proper time and delivered to the students. Students are guided how to give information on a particular test or not. Provide opportunities for teachers to practice applying the marking scheme. Assessment should be meaningful. You know that only wastage of time, for example you conduct a test, take the test and do not mark the test, that is meaningless. You develop a test and that test is unable to give you relevant information, that is meaningless. So keeping in view these points, that your assessment should have power to collect the data for which that test has been developed, okay, and the information got through test should be equally useful for interpretation and for making decision. Any component missing in the process of assessment make your assessment meaningless. So assessment should be meaningful. Now purpose of assessment, there are so many other purposes of assessment, that why assessment, how assessment, when assessment, those are very little things that you will learn in your text, but here I am going to describe three purposes of assessment: assessment for learning, assessment of learning, and assessment as learning. These are new ideas regarding assessment. Now, what is assessment for learning? You know that when a teacher is in the classroom and the teacher does not know what is the previous level of his or her students, how he or she can make connection with the next coming concepts. So, assessment for learning is based upon checking the previous knowledge of the students and then identify proficiency and competency of the students. For example, you are going to conduct practical in the laboratory, and if you do not know what are the competencies of the students for conduction of that particular practical, it will become difficult that there would be some students who are not competent. So, you have to do something to make them competent for the performance of practical in the laboratory. Second is assessment of learning, managing and planning assessment, and second is checking students' progress. So, you can say it is a kind of ongoing assessment. Assessment of learning, for example, I teach for 10 minutes, then I pose a question that how much learning has been done. So, this will be assessment of learning, and after 40 minutes again I give test to the students, for example 5 MCQs to the students, and all students select the correct option. This means my teaching method was effective, all students were attentive, and the teaching process was going in the right way. So, this is also a part of assessment of learning. How only you must have a clear idea in what situation and where assessment for learning is used, assessment of learning is used, and assessment as learning is used. Assessment as learning, reflection of evidence. For example, while doing assessment for learning, there are some results which tell me that my teaching method is not good. Students are not learning effectively when a particular teacher was teaching them and that teacher was untrained. So, this was the evidence I got through test, observation, by interviewing the students. Now, interviewing the students, that is also a tool, observation is also a tool, test is also a tool, but in our classes most probably used tool is the test. That is why I told you that we should be aware and we should have an understanding regarding test and testing. So, I observed that teachers are not attentive. So, I got an evidence through observation that why students are not so attentive in any particular lesson. Then on the basis of that evidence I will do something. When I will do something, I will reflect on this evidence. This is called assessment as learning. Then both assessment of learning and assessment for learning, they come in the category of assessment as learning. So, these are very important concept. These are 3 assessment purposes which have much focus in many other countries as well. Now, I am going to tell you different types of assessment. There are number of assessments. Remember that type of assessment can be distinguished from one form to another form or from one kind to another form on the basis of its function, on the basis of its construction, and on the basis of its process, or on the basis of objectives. We have seen that mostly formative and summative assessment is used in our classroom, but at the same time so many other types of assessment are going on. So, there are little bit distinguishing features which when you will aware about them, so they will help you to explore further things relating to that type of assessment. The first type of assessment is formal. Now, as meanings of this word show, formal means in a arranged way. The assessment which take place, for example, teacher teach and develop a test out of that taught content, then give to the students, mark the test, then make decisions and reflect upon it. This is a type of formal. Each and every type of assessment have certain steps. Okay. But a teacher is teaching, teacher is observing that one student is doing something wrong. He is you can say doing unusual things. Teacher is going to observe that person. What is that this type of assessment, and assess that this person has some problem. This person has, so the teacher will try to take some time out of his teaching to seek the problem, what type of problem is existing. One thing, it also go on diagnostic, but diagnostic is different to that of informal. That diagnostic assessment is done prior to the teaching, but this is now the tool was observation. The teacher was observing the situation and he got that there is something wrong. This is an informal way of assessment. Summative assessment, the assessment which is done at the end of a program, end of a lesson. When assessment is done at the end of a lesson, that is summative assessment for that lesson. But when assessment is done after 1 year, that is assessment of one program. Okay. Formative assessment, there are drawbacks in formative assessment when we compare formative assessment and summative assessment. After summative assessment, only decisions are of the different nature, that we have to decide whether to promote the student, whether to retain the student, or whether student will use some more time to learn a certain subject, or something other will be decided about that. But in formative assessment, formation takes place. The lesson is taught, and during the teaching of lesson, assessment is done, and when found, feedback is given as a result of formative assessment. For example, I am teaching biology and my students are not able to tell who proposed cell theory. So, in formative assessment, I will pose a simple question to the students. When students are unable to answer me who was the proponent of cell theory, then I will again tell them that they were Schleiden and Schwann who put cell theory in 1938 and in 1839. I am not sure about 1839 and 1838. So, this was the result of formative assessment, that I formed this deficiency by telling the students again this information. Then traditional assessment. Traditional assessment means that there is a stereotype format of conducting assessment. For example, the assessment which is going on, that there was much stress upon the formative assessment, much focus upon what teacher want to know from the student. So, in contrast to traditional assessment, formative assessment, continuing assessment, performance assessment, formative assessment have been emerged, because in traditional assessment, as traditional teaching, teacher is the master of this type of assessment. Whatsoever teacher wants, he will do or she will do, and there is no importance given to the students. Thank you. Authentic assessment is very important type of assessment in which the result should be authentic. The result should be, this means that when the whole process of assessment is followed, whole process of assessment is followed and results are of no use. So what is authenticity of that assessment? You know that nowadays what type of assessment is done by NTS, Pakistan Testing Service, Universal Testing Service and other FPSC, PPSC. You know, they conduct a type of assessment which is authentic and is accepted each and everywhere. The results of that assessment are accepted each and everywhere. Then comes ongoing and continuing assessment. Now there is very subtle difference between formative assessment and ongoing assessment. In ongoing assessment, you are using formative, informal way and even authentic type of assessment. They are different from other assessment only due to the name and function that ongoing and continuing assessment is going on every time, and is fulfilling all aspects. All aspects mean that during the teaching learning process, they are observing each and everything. Other type of assessment are effective, placement assessment, screening, performance assessment and affective assessment. तो ये थी बच्चों जो टाइप्स ऑफ असेसमेंट थी। मुझे यकीन है कि असेसमेंट के हवाले से जो थोड़ा बहुत टेस्ट के हवाले से, टेस्टिंग के हवाले से, इस असेसमेंट के पर्पज़ के हवाले से, इसकी टाइप्स के हवाले से जो कुछ आपको बताया है आपको समझ आ गई होगी। थैंक यू वेरी मच। अल्लाह हाफिज़।